Single mother millionaire despised a homeless child, but the truth about her broke everyone's hearts. Today, you're about to witness a story that will remind you that sometimes the smallest acts of cruelty can reveal the biggest truths about who we really are, and that love can be found in the most unexpected places. If you're ready for this emotional journey that will challenge everything you think you know about family, privilege, and what it means to truly care for a child, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and activate those notifications. Let's dive into this incredible story that unfolded in the heart of Seattle, Washington. The autumn rain fell steadily against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse office on the 40th floor of the Columbia Tower, each droplet racing down the glass like tears against the Seattle skyline. Inside the luxurious space, Victoria Sterling sat behind her mahogany desk, reviewing quarterly reports from her chain of high-end boutique fitness studios that had made her a multi-millionaire by age 35. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun that matched her perfectly tailored business suit, and her manicured fingers moved across her laptop keyboard with the efficiency of someone who had built an empire through relentless determination and an unwillingness to accept anything less than perfection. Victoria's success story was the kind that business magazines loved to feature, a single mother who had transformed personal tragedy into professional triumph, building a fitness empire from nothing while raising her 8-year-old daughter Emma, as a testament to what could be achieved through hard work and refusal to be defeated by circumstances. What the magazines didn't know, what Victoria worked very hard to keep hidden, was that her transformation from struggling single mother to wealthy entrepreneur had come at a cost that went far beyond the financial investments required to build her business. 5 years earlier, Victoria had been Sarah Michelle Thompson, a 29-year-old divorced mother living in a cramped studio apartment in Tacoma, working 2 jobs to make rent while trying to provide some semblance of stability for 3-year-old Emma. The divorce from Emma's father had been brutal, leaving Sarah with enormous legal debts and a custody arrangement that provided minimal child support from a man who seemed more interested in starting his new life than maintaining connections with his old one. Sarah had discovered fitness during those dark months following her divorce, initially as a way to combat the stress and depression that threatened to overwhelm her daily attempts to keep her small family afloat. The local gym had become her sanctuary, the one place where she could focus entirely on her own strength and endurance, rather than the seemingly insurmountable challenges of single motherhood and financial survival. What started as personal therapy had gradually evolved into professional opportunity. Sarah had natural teaching ability and an intuitive understanding of how exercise could transform not just physical health, but mental resilience. She began teaching classes at her gym, then at other facilities around Tacoma, building a reputation for intensity and inspiration that attracted clients who were dealing with their own versions of life's setbacks and challenges. The transformation from Sarah to Victoria had been deliberate and calculated. When Sarah opened her first studio, she had legally changed her name, crafted a new personal history that emphasized her business success while minimizing her background of struggle and poverty, and created an image of effortless prosperity that would appeal to the affluent clients she needed to build a sustainable business. Victoria Sterling was confident, successful, and completely in control of her environment. Sarah Michelle Thompson had been frightened, overwhelmed, and constantly worried about her ability to provide for her daughter. Victoria had convinced herself that the transformation was necessary not just for business success, but for Emma's future, that her daughter deserved to grow up with security and opportunities that could only be provided through wealth and social status. But the transformation had required Victoria to suppress parts of herself that had once been central to her identity. Sarah had possessed natural empathy for people facing difficult circumstances, an understanding born from her own experience of what it meant to struggle with poverty and uncertainty. Victoria had systematically eliminated that empathy, viewing it as a weakness that could interfere with the ruthless focus required to build and maintain her business empire. The morning that would challenge everything Victoria had become started like any other Tuesday in her carefully orchestrated routine. She arrived at her flagship studio in downtown Seattle at 6 a.m., 2 hours before the first classes would begin, using the quiet time to review financial reports, plan marketing strategies, and ensure that every aspect of her business was operating at peak efficiency. Sterling Fitness had grown from a single studio in Tacoma to a chain of 12 premium locations throughout the Pacific Northwest, each designed to provide what Victoria called transformational fitness experiences for clients who could afford to pay premium prices for premium results. The studios were temples of modern design and expensive equipment, staffed by instructors who were selected as much for their appearance and personality as for their fitness qualifications. Victoria's own office occupied the entire top floor of her flagship location, a space designed to project success and authority through every carefully chosen detail. Original artwork covered the walls, expensive furniture created an atmosphere of sophisticated luxury, and the panoramic views of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains reminded everyone who entered that this was the domain of someone who had achieved remarkable success. At 8:30 that morning, Victoria was reviewing staffing schedules when her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom system. "Ms. Sterling, there's a situation developing outside the main entrance that I think you should be aware of." Victoria looked up from her laptop, irritation flickering across her features. "What kind of situation, Amanda?" "There's a homeless child sitting by our front door," Amanda replied, her voice carrying the kind of concerned uncertainty that suggested she wasn't sure how her employer would want such a matter handled. "She appears to be alone, and she's been there for about an hour. Some of our early morning clients have mentioned feeling uncomfortable walking past her." Victoria felt a flash of anger at this disruption to her carefully controlled environment. Sterling Fitness had spent years building a reputation as a premium destination where affluent clients could focus on their health and wellness goals without being confronted by the kind of social problems they preferred to ignore. A homeless child sitting outside the main entrance was exactly the kind of image problem that could damage the exclusive atmosphere Victoria had worked so hard to create. "Have you called social services?" Victoria asked, already reaching for her phone to review the day's client appointments. "I wasn't sure if that was appropriate," Amanda replied. "She doesn't seem to be causing any trouble, she's just sitting there, but I can see why clients might be concerned." Victoria stood up from her desk and walked to the windows overlooking the street below. Even from 40 floors up, she could see the small figure huddled near the entrance to her building, a splash of vulnerability against the pristine glass and steel of the downtown business district. "I'll handle this personally," Victoria said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to solving problems quickly and decisively. "Have security. Make sure our morning clients have alternative entrances available until this situation is resolved." Victoria took the elevator down to street level, her mind already formulating the most efficient approach to removing this obstacle to her business operations. She had dealt with similar situations before, homeless individuals who chose to loiter near her studios, either seeking charity or simply looking for temporary shelter from Seattle's unpredictable weather. Victoria had learned that direct confrontation, delivered with sufficient authority and the implicit threat of police involvement, usually resolved such situations quickly and permanently. But as Victoria emerged from her building's lobby and approached the child sitting by her studio's entrance, she found herself momentarily taken aback by what she saw. The girl appeared to be about 7 or 8 years old, roughly the same age as Emma, with dark hair that needed washing and clothes that were obviously too small and had clearly been worn for far too long. She was holding a cardboard sign that read "Hungry" in crayon letters, But she wasn't actively soliciting passers-by. Instead, she sat quietly with her knees drawn up to her chest, watching the stream of well-dressed professionals hurrying past without making eye contact. Victoria's first instinct was professional concern about the impact this child's presence might have on her business. Her second instinct, buried deeper but still present, was a flicker of recognition. Something about the girl's posture, her quiet dignity in the face of obviously difficult circumstances, reminded Victoria of her own daughter during the darkest days following her divorce. But Victoria had spent 5 years training herself to suppress such recognitions, to view personal empathy as a luxury she couldn't afford if she wanted to maintain the success she had built. She approached the child with the authoritative manner she used for handling any business problem that required immediate resolution. "Excuse me," Victoria said, her voice carrying the tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "You can't sit here." The child looked up at Victoria with eyes that seemed far too serious for someone her age. "I'm not hurting anyone," she said softly, her voice barely audible above the street noise. Victoria felt a moment of uncomfortable recognition. The child's response was exactly what Emma might have said in similar circumstances, polite but determined, trying to maintain dignity while acknowledging the authority of an adult. But Victoria pushed aside such thoughts, focusing instead on the practical necessity of protecting her business interests. "This is private property," Victoria continued, her voice becoming more stern. "You're making my clients uncomfortable, and that's bad for business. You need to move somewhere else." The child looked down at her cardboard sign, then back up at Victoria. "I don't have anywhere else to go." Victoria felt another uncomfortable flicker of empathy, but she reminded herself that she was responsible for her own child's security and her business's success, not for solving the broader social problems that led to children being homeless on Seattle streets. "That's not my problem," Victoria said, her voice becoming colder. "There are shelters and social services that handle situations like yours, but you can't stay here disrupting my business." The child stood up slowly, gathering her few possessions with the careful movements of someone who had learned to protect everything she owned because losing anything would mean going without. "Where should I go?" she asked, not in a challenging way, but as if she genuinely hoped Victoria might have a helpful suggestion. Victoria gestured vaguely toward the street. "Anywhere that isn't here. This is a business district. There are parks, shelters, places that are more appropriate for your situation." The child nodded solemnly, as if accepting Victoria's judgment about where she belonged in the world. She picked up her cardboard sign and began walking away, but she had only taken a few steps when she turned back to Victoria. "Ma'am," the child said hesitantly, "do you know if there's a bathroom I could use somewhere?" Victoria felt a flash of irritation at the continued interaction. "Try the McDonald's 6 blocks down," she said curtly. "They have public restrooms." The child nodded again and continued walking, her small figure disappearing into the crowd of pedestrians with the resigned acceptance of someone who had learned not to expect kindness or assistance from the adult world. Victoria watched her go, feeling a complex mixture of relief that the problem had been resolved and discomfort about the method she had used to resolve it. She reminded herself that she had been perfectly within her rights to ask the child to move, that she had a responsibility to her clients and her business, and that there were social services agencies specifically designed to help homeless children. But as Victoria returned to her office, she found herself distracted by the memory of the child's serious eyes and quiet dignity. There had been something familiar about her, something that reminded Victoria of her own daughter in ways that made her uncomfortable to contemplate. The distraction proved temporary as Victoria threw herself into the demands of managing her business empire. She had client consultations, staff meetings, and financial reviews that required her complete attention. By lunchtime, she had successfully pushed the morning's encounter out of her mind, focusing instead on the measurable achievements and controllable challenges that defined her professional world. It was late that afternoon when Victoria's carefully constructed mental barriers began to crack. She was reviewing membership numbers when Amanda's voice came through the intercom again. "Ms. Sterling, I have some information about the child who was outside this morning that I thought you should know about." Victoria looked up from her computer screen, surprised to find that she was curious rather than annoyed by this interruption. "What information?" "I was talking with some of the other business owners in the building," Amanda said. "Apparently that little girl has been in the neighborhood for about a week. She's not panhandling or causing problems, she just sits quietly in different locations, and people have seen her going through dumpsters looking for food." Victoria felt something uncomfortable twist in her stomach. "What else?" "The security guard at the building across the street said she sleeps in the alley behind the parking garage. He's been letting her stay there because she doesn't cause trouble and she always cleans up after herself. But Ms. Sterling, he also said she looks sick. Really sick." Victoria stared out her office windows at the Seattle skyline, trying to suppress the images that Amanda's information was creating in her mind. A 7-year-old child, alone on the streets, sleeping in alleys, searching through garbage for food, possibly ill, and definitely without any of the basic care and protection that children required. "Did anyone call social services?" Victoria asked. "The security guard said he's tried, but the child runs away whenever anyone in an official capacity tries to approach her. He thinks she's afraid of being put into the system, maybe because of bad experiences before." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, processing information that was challenging her ability to maintain professional detachment from personal empathy. "Thank you for letting me know, Amanda." But as Victoria tried to return to her work, she found her concentration completely shattered. Every time she looked at financial reports or client schedules, she saw instead the image of a small child with serious eyes, holding a cardboard sign, asking politely where she should go after being told she couldn't stay where she was. That evening, Victoria picked up Emma from her expensive private school and drove to their penthouse apartment overlooking Puget Sound, going through the familiar routines of homework assistance and dinner preparation, while fighting a growing sense of unease about the contrast between her daughter's comfort and security and the vulnerability of the child she had encountered that morning. Emma chattered happily about her school day, her friends, her plans for an upcoming birthday party that would cost more than many families spent on groceries in a month. Victoria found herself studying her daughter's face, seeing in Emma's confident smile and carefree manner the security that came from knowing she was loved, protected, and provided for in every possible way. "Mom," Emma said suddenly, interrupting Victoria's thoughts. "There was a girl at school today who said her family might have to move because they can't afford their rent anymore. That's scary, isn't it? Not having a place to live?" Victoria felt her throat tighten. "Yes, sweetheart, that would be very scary." "What happens to kids when their families don't have homes?" Emma asked with the direct curiosity of an 8-year-old who was just beginning to understand that not all children lived the way she did. Victoria struggled to find an answer that would satisfy Emma's question without exposing her to information that might be too frightening or complex for her to process. "There are people who help families in those situations," Victoria said carefully. "Social workers, shelters, programs designed to make sure children are safe and cared for." "But what if those people can't find them?" Emma persisted. "What if a kid was lost and didn't know how to get help?" Victoria looked at her daughter, seeing in Emma's concerned expression the natural empathy that Victoria had once possessed but had trained herself to suppress. "Why are you asking about this, Em?" Emma shrugged. "I don't know. I just think it would be really scary to be a kid without a mom or dad to take care of you." That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Victoria stood at her living room windows, looking out at the city lights, and thinking about the child she had dismissed that morning. Somewhere out there, a little girl was spending another night sleeping in an alley, hungry and possibly sick, with no one to make sure she was safe or to reassure her that everything would be okay. Victoria tried to tell herself that she had no responsibility for the child's situation, that there were social services agencies and charitable organizations specifically designed to address homelessness and child welfare. But she couldn't escape the uncomfortable recognition that her dismissal of the child had been motivated more by concern for her business image than by any genuine consideration of what the child needed or deserved. The next morning, Victoria found herself leaving for work 30 minutes earlier than usual, telling herself that she needed to review inventory reports, but knowing that she was actually hoping to see whether the homeless child had returned to the area around her studio. She walked slowly past the building's entrance, looking for any sign of the small figure who had disrupted her thoughts and challenged her comfortable assumptions about her responsibilities to others. The child wasn't there, and Victoria felt a complex mixture of relief and disappointment. She told herself that the girl had probably found help through appropriate channels, that her absence was a positive sign indicating that proper authorities had intervened to provide the care and support the child needed. But Victoria's peace of mind proved short-lived. As she was unlocking her office that morning, she noticed Amanda standing at the window overlooking the street, her expression troubled. "Miss Sterling," Amanda said as Victoria entered the office, "I think you should see this." Victoria joined Amanda at the window, and her heart sank at what she saw below. The homeless child was back, but now she was clearly ill. Even from 40 floors up, Victoria could see that the girl was lying on her side near the building entrance, her cardboard sign forgotten beside her, her small body curled into a position that suggested she was in significant pain or distress. Victoria felt something inside her chest break apart, like ice cracking under pressure. The child who had asked politely where she should go, who had accepted Victoria's dismissal with quiet dignity, was now seriously ill and alone on the street below. "Call 911, Victoria said, her voice tight with emotion she had spent years learning to control. "Call for an ambulance now." "Already did," Amanda replied. "They should be here within minutes." Victoria watched from her office window as paramedics arrived and began providing medical attention to the child, their efficient movements suggesting that her condition was indeed serious enough to require immediate intervention. She saw them load the small figure onto a stretcher and into the ambulance, and she found herself grabbing her purse and heading for the elevator without any clear plan, beyond a desperate need to follow that ambulance and make sure the child received the care she needed. Victoria arrived at Seattle Children's Hospital 20 minutes behind the ambulance, her heart pounding from a combination of adrenaline and emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She approached the emergency room reception desk with the kind of determination that had built her business empire. "The little girl who just came in by ambulance," Victoria said to the receptionist. "The homeless child. I need to know how she's doing." The receptionist looked at Victoria with professional sympathy mixed with confusion. "Are you family?" Victoria hesitated. She wasn't family. She had no legal relationship to this child, no official reason to be involved in her medical care. In fact, less than 24 hours earlier, she had told this same child that her problems weren't Victoria's concern. Victoria struggled to find words that would explain her presence. "I'm someone who cares about her." The receptionist studied Victoria's expensive clothes and obvious wealth, clearly trying to understand the connection between this successful businesswoman and a homeless child. "I'm sorry, but I can only provide information to family members or legal guardians." Victoria felt frustration building in her chest. She doesn't have family. She's been living on the streets. Someone needs to make sure she gets the care she needs. "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but we have protocols we have to follow. Social services has been contacted, and they'll work with our medical team to ensure the child receives appropriate care." Victoria wanted to argue, to demand information, to use her wealth and influence to break through the bureaucratic barriers that were keeping her from helping the child. But she also recognized that these protocols existed to protect vulnerable children from adults who might not have their best interests at heart. She found herself in the hospital waiting room, a space she hadn't occupied since Emma's birth 8 years earlier. The institutional furniture, the fluorescent lighting, the anxiety that seemed to permeate every surface. It all reminded Victoria of a version of herself she had worked hard to leave behind. The frightened young mother who had once sat in similar waiting rooms, worrying about her ability to provide for her daughter's needs. Hours passed before a social worker approached Victoria, a tired-looking woman in her 50s who carried herself with the weary compassion of someone who had seen too much human suffering and not enough resources to address it adequately. "Are you the woman who called the ambulance for Lucy?" the social worker asked. Lucy. The child had a name, an identity beyond the generic description of homeless child that Victoria had been using to maintain emotional distance. "Yes," Victoria replied. "How is she?" The social worker sat down beside Victoria, her expression serious. "She's severely malnourished and dehydrated, and she has pneumonia that's progressed to a dangerous stage. If you hadn't called for help when you did, she probably wouldn't have survived another night on the streets." Victoria felt the full weight of that information settle over her like a crushing burden. She had sent Lucy away the day before, telling her to find somewhere else to go, and Lucy had spent that night getting sicker while sleeping in an alley, because Victoria had been more concerned about her business image than about a child's welfare. "Is she going to be okay?" Victoria asked. "With proper medical care and time to recover, yes, she should be fine. But Ms. Sterling, Victoria Sterling. Miss Sterling, I have to ask why you're here. What's your connection to Lucy?" Victoria struggled to answer that question honestly. "I encountered her yesterday outside my business. I told her she couldn't stay there, that she needed to go somewhere else. I've been thinking about her ever since, and when I saw her collapse this morning, I realized I couldn't just ignore her situation anymore." The social worker studied Victoria with the assessing gaze of someone trained to evaluate adult motivations when children's welfare was at stake. "Lucy has been in and out of foster care for most of her life. Her mother died of a drug overdose 2 years ago, and she's been running away from placement facilities because she's been abused in some of them. She's learned not to trust adults, especially adults in authority positions." Victoria felt tears forming in her eyes as she absorbed this information. Lucy wasn't just homeless. She was a child who had been failed repeatedly by the systems designed to protect her, who had learned that survival meant avoiding the very people who should have been keeping her safe. "What happens to her now?" Victoria asked. "Once she's medically stable, we'll work on finding her an appropriate placement. But I have to be honest, Ms. Sterling, children with Lucy's history of trauma and running away have a difficult time in traditional foster care settings. She needs specialized care, therapy, and adults who are committed to helping her heal from everything she's experienced." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, processing information that was reshaping her understanding of Lucy's situation and her own responsibilities. "Can I see her?" The social worker hesitated. "She's still sedated, and when she wakes up, she's going to be frightened and confused. She doesn't know who you are, and given her history with adults, unexpected visitors might increase her anxiety." "I understand," Victoria said, "but I'd like her to know that someone cares about what happens to her. Someone who's not part of the official system, someone who just wants to make sure she's okay." Over the next 3 days, Victoria found herself spending every free hour at the hospital, initially just sitting in the waiting room in case there were updates about Lucy's condition, but gradually becoming more involved as the social worker began to understand Victoria's genuine concern for the child's welfare. When Lucy finally woke up, she was indeed frightened and confused, unsure where she was or why she was connected to medical equipment in a sterile hospital room. Victoria watched through the observation window as nurses and social workers tried to calm the child's panic, her heart breaking at the sight of Lucy's terrified eyes and the way she flinched whenever an adult tried to touch her. "She's been awake for 6 hours," the social worker told Victoria, "but she hasn't spoken a word. She just watches everyone like she's waiting for something bad to happen." Victoria studied the small figure in the hospital bed, seeing in Lucy's defensive posture and wary expression the kind of hypervigilance that came from having learned that adults often meant danger rather than safety. "What can I do to help?" The social worker looked at Victoria with newfound respect. "You could try talking to her. Sometimes children respond better to people who aren't part of the official system. She might be more willing to communicate with someone who doesn't represent authority or institutions." Victoria entered Lucy's room slowly, carrying a small stuffed animal that Emma had insisted on sending when she learned about the sick little girl her mother was trying to help. Lucy's eyes tracked Victoria's movement with the intensity of someone assessing potential threat, but she didn't try to hide or call for help. "Hi, Lucy," Victoria said softly, settling into the chair beside the child's bed. "My name is Victoria. You probably don't remember me, but we met outside my office building a couple of days ago." Lucy's expression didn't change, but Victoria could see recognition flickering in her eyes. "I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry," Victoria continued. "When I saw you that morning, I was worried about my business and my clients, but I should have been worried about you. I should have asked if you needed help instead of telling you to go away." Lucy continued to watch Victoria without speaking, but something in her posture seemed to relax slightly. "My daughter Emma wanted me to bring you this," Victoria said, offering the stuffed animal. "She heard that you were sick and she thought you might like something soft to hold while you're getting better." For the first time since Victoria had entered the room, Lucy's expression changed. She looked at the stuffed animal with longing, but didn't reach for it, as if she was afraid it might be taken away if she showed too much interest. "You can keep it," Victoria said gently. "Emma has lots of stuffed animals, and she specifically picked this one for you because she thought you would like it." Lucy slowly reached out and took the stuffed animal, holding it against her chest with the careful movements of someone who wasn't accustomed to receiving gifts. When she looked back at Victoria, her eyes were filled with tears. "Why are you here?" Lucy asked, her voice barely a whisper. Victoria felt her own throat tighten with emotion. "Because I realized that when I saw you outside my building, I saw someone who reminded me of my own daughter, and I couldn't stop thinking about what would happen to Emma if she ever found herself alone and scared and needing help from strangers." Lucy was quiet for a long moment. "I tried to be good," she said finally. "I wasn't bothering anyone. I just didn't have anywhere else to go." Victoria felt tears spilling down her cheeks. "You were good, Lucy. You were perfect. I was the one who made a mistake." Over the following days, Victoria found herself becoming increasingly involved in Lucy's care and recovery. She learned about the child's history from social workers, discovered that Lucy was actually highly intelligent despite having missed significant amounts of school due to her unstable living situation, and began to understand the complex trauma that had shaped the quiet, watchful child who seemed to expect disappointment and abandonment from every adult interaction. Lucy had been born to a teenage mother who had struggled with drug addiction for most of Lucy's early childhood. She had been placed in foster care at age 4 when her mother's addiction made it impossible for her to provide basic care, but she had been returned to her mother's custody 18 months later when her mother completed a rehabilitation program. The reunion had lasted less than a year before her mother's relapse led to another foster care placement, then another attempt at reunification, then another failure, and another placement. By the time Lucy's mother died of an overdose, Lucy had been in 7 different foster homes and had learned that attachments to adults inevitably led to loss and disappointment. The most recent foster placement had ended when Lucy discovered that her foster father was abusing other children in the home. She had tried to report the abuse to social workers, but when her claims weren't immediately believed, she had run away rather than risk being returned to a dangerous situation. "She's been living on the streets for 6 months," the social worker explained to Victoria. "She's learned to be invisible, to avoid adults, to survive by staying in the shadows. The fact that she's talking to you at all is remarkable." Victoria spent hours sitting with Lucy, reading to her, helping her with educational materials the hospital had provided, and gradually earning the trust of a child who had learned to expect betrayal from every adult relationship. Lucy was brilliant, curious, and possessed a resilience that reminded Victoria of her own determination to overcome difficult circumstances. "Lucy," Victoria said one afternoon as they were working together on a math worksheet, "what do you want most in the world?" Lucy was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the seriousness she brought to everything. "I want someone to keep me," she said finally. Victoria felt her heart break at the simple, devastating honesty of that answer. "What do you mean?" "I want someone who won't send me away when things get hard," Lucy explained. "Someone who won't get tired of me or decide I'm too much trouble. Someone who will let me stay even when I make mistakes." Victoria reached over and took Lucy's small hand in hers. "Lucy, would you like to come live with me and my daughter Emma?" Lucy's eyes widened with an expression that mixed hope with the kind of caution that came from too many promises that hadn't been kept. "You mean it?" "I mean it," Victoria said, understanding as she spoke the words that she was making the most important decision of her life. But it would mean going through lots of official processes, meeting with social workers, making sure it's what's best for everyone. "And Lucy, I need you to know that if you come to live with us, it would be permanent. I wouldn't send you away because things got difficult or complicated." Lucy squeezed Victoria's hand with surprising strength. "I won't be any trouble. I promise I'll be good." "Lucy," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion, "you don't have to be perfect to be loved. You just have to be yourself." No, sir. The adoption process took 8 months, during which Victoria learned more about child trauma, therapeutic parenting, and her own capacity for love than she had thought possible. She converted her home office into a bedroom for Lucy, enrolled in parenting classes focused on helping children heal from complex trauma, and gradually introduced Lucy to the idea that she could have a permanent family. Emma embraced her new sister with the wholehearted acceptance of a child who had been raised to believe that love could expand to include anyone who needed it. The two girls, despite their different backgrounds and experiences, developed the kind of close bond that came from recognizing something essential in each other. Victoria discovered that her business success, while important, paled in comparison to the satisfaction of helping Lucy learn to trust, to laugh, to believe in her own worth and potential. The child who had once sat quietly outside her office, holding a cardboard sign, now filled Victoria's home with questions, discoveries, and the kind of joy that came from finally feeling safe enough to be a child. On the first anniversary of Lucy's adoption, Victoria stood in her kitchen, watching her daughters work together on a school project, their heads bent over poster board and markers as they debated the best way to illustrate their presentation about family diversity. Lucy was now a confident 9-year-old who excelled in school, had made close friends, and had learned to argue with Emma with the comfortable irritation of a real sister. "Mom," Lucy said, looking up from their project, "Emma says I should write about how we became a family for our presentation. Is that okay?" Victoria felt tears forming in her eyes as she remembered the frightened, sick child who had once asked her where she should go after being told she couldn't stay where she was. "That sounds perfect, sweetheart. I want to tell them about how sometimes families find each other in unexpected ways," Lucy continued, "and how love doesn't depend on being related by blood. It depends on choosing to take care of each other." Victoria knelt down beside her daughters. pulling them both into a hug that felt like the completion of a circle she hadn't known was broken. That sounds like the most important lesson anyone could learn. Udun, the homeless child who had disrupted Victoria's business and challenged her assumptions about her responsibilities to others, had become the daughter who taught Victoria what it really meant to be successful. Not the kind of success measured in bank accounts or business achievements, but the kind measured in the trust of a child who had learned to believe in love again, and in the knowledge that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the most inconvenient interruptions to our perfectly planned lives. Victoria Sterling had built an empire through determination and ruthless focus, but Lucy Thompson Sterling had built a family through the simple act of asking for help and the courage to believe that someone might actually provide it. And in the end, that turned out to be the only success that really mattered.